Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 112th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'm going to re explore once again the concept of everything is happening now, because I find that's one of the most confusing and most difficult to understand kind of idea or concept. Um, I find it just worthwhile wrapping my head around it again from time and again, so that I explain it always with different examples, a different perspective. And I just find that if you listen to every time that I've spoken about this and you stitch it all together, you're starting like everything is sort of, it's like exploring different pieces of the same puzzle. It just gives you a better and better understanding and overview of how this works. So I've prepared something here. It's basically, imagine this is a day, typical day in the life of someone, and at different hours of the day, there are different things that you can do. Um, and just imagine that there are an infinite number of streams of consciousness. Let's call it streams of consciousness, which experience reality at the same time, but they give themselves the illusion of time and space and causality and linear time to experience these events sequentially, for instance. But what I wanted to show you is that basically, if you are one of those streams of consciousness and you decide, for instance, to experience these events in one particular order, for instance, you wake up, you read a book, you meditate, and then you go to the restaurant. You can also, of course, as a stream of consciousness, that same day, you can say, well, I'm going to stay in bed, then I'm going to go for a walk, then I'm going to meditate, and then I'm going to order pizza. Or you can go to the toilet, read a book, gardening, and fasting. Or yet, alternatively, you can also get dressed, have some yoga, do some gardening, and then cook dinner. And these are all basically your other selves. It's always yourself here. The same day, you just decide to do. You just decide to sort of experience yourself doing all kinds of different things and in different parallel realities, for instance, but they're not necessarily connected to each other. So when people are saying everything is happening now, that doesn't mean that everything is aware of everything else happening now, and only the absolute, oops, sort of has that kind of vantage point. But from its point of view, because it's making every single possible conceivable choice at the same time, it doesn't really matter from its perspective. It's, when you make all possible choices, is the same as if you make no possible choice, because they all contradict each other. And so, from the absolute's perspective, it's just there's no way you can gain anything from that. But from a particular vantage point of one of these streams of consciousnesses, like this one, for instance, it is completely disconnected from this other one. And so everything happening now makes it seem as if these experiences are somehow interlinked or connected or in relation with each other. And in some sense they are, but not the way that we think they are. And in some of my previous videos, I was talking about the fact that everything creates everything else. Well, imagine if you wake up here in this stream of consciousness and you're saying, should I wake up or should I stay in bed? I'm going to stay in bed. But you've also thought about the possibility of waking up. So you're sending energy, you're feeding basically energy with your thought to this stream of consciousness. And from this stream of consciousness, where you wake up, you say, "Am I I'm going to go to the bathroom now or later?" And you say, "I'm going to go later." And so you're giving attention to this stream of consciousness, where you go to the toilet. And then as you're on the toilet, you're thinking, "Oh, I should have gotten dressed before I went to the toilet because now I'm cold." And so you're sending energy to this stream of consciousness because that's where you choose to get dressed. And from that point of view of consciousness, you're sending energy. For instance, you're getting dressed and you're saying, "Oh, I'm so tired, I should have stayed in bed." And so you're sending energy to this stream of consciousness. And you see that sort of everything, again, as in the previous example, everything creates everything else. And it's also especially linked with emotions. So that's how you basically navigate normally through this maze, is that you're trying to reach the emotion or be guided by the emotion of the version of you that is going for a walk here. And you're trying to see if you can bridge the emotional gap, quote unquote, between the you that stays in bed and the you that goes for a walk. And there is an emotional kind of evolution there where you're trying to tap into that feeling and see if you can switch from that feeling to this feeling. And then you'll experience it as sequential events that get you to experience going for a walk. But it's all emotional in my mind. It's not rational. That is, you're navigating through this maze through emotions. And at every point in the now, all of these versions of you are feeling something as they're doing these activities. And they're actually feeling different things. For instance, you can go for a swim and be depressed and be happy. But it's your state of being that is the most important part. And so all of this also can be broken down into a nearly infinite number of scenes where you go for a swim, because there are an infinite number of emotional states that you can be in within every one of these activities. And so essentially, what you're doing is less important than the emotions you're navigating through, because all of this is like a decor. It's like a theater, a scene of a theater with very nice, very nice, sceneries and everything, and gadgets and whatnot. But they are just a support for emotions. How can I put it in another way? Yeah, so it's basically just like an opera. You can have a very nice sort of setting on the scene that can be futuristic or medieval or whatever, and you have many operas that have been modernized. Like, for instance, they're supposed to take place in the 16th century, and they sort of revamp them to make them look like they're modern. So the scenery is fine, but it's the emotions of the songs that you sing and what's going on within the opera is what's important. The support is just there as a support, as something in the background to give it context. So imagine if you had an empty scene with nothing, and very bland clothes. Of course, singers can still, like, sing and express their emotions, but sometimes it's just much more clear or straightforward or comprehensible when, for instance, if an opera singer is singing about how she's sad because her husband just died or something, it's nice to have like the context, the sinking boat, or the crumbled building, or something, all of the props basically around that. And so that's what this maze is actually. It's just props, I would say. Like maybe these are just props for an eternal now, where you're shifting between different emotional states, and those emotional states are like a one big symphony where you're exploring, yeah, all your different energetic states, just like a pianist would you know try to play all the notes of the piano, but not in a boring way where he just go like from the lowest key to the highest key, but in an interesting way. um, and so, yeah, I mean, the absolute, or all of us, basically all of our emotions are, just like the keys on a piano, but there's just always more and more interesting ways of playing them, of experiencing them. Just like with the keys on a piano, in the early music, when the piano was first invented, what you would play on the piano was very basic. So you had very basic melodies, not very interesting. And then as you mastered that, then then it would evolve into much more complex melodies with complex harmonies, and so forth. And I think that's what we're basically playing at, is a giant emotional symphony, that is becoming ever more complex, and we're trying to see how far we can push that level of complexity without getting lost in the props, and the sort of emotional, um, uh, reaching an emotional dead end, if you will. That is, you're unable to sort of navigate through the props and make it an interesting and nice symphony, and you sort of spiral down an emotional black hole that sucks you into, like, I don't know, full despair, or full hatred, or full whatever, something that full fear, which is something that doesn't even enable you to sort of go towards the end of the symphony and play that chord. Like if it like musicians that would just, at a rehearsal, at some point, it would just fizzle out, like they would lose their sync, and the symphony would just die out, and then the conductor would go and say, okay, start over from measure 65 or something. um, so yeah, there's a lot of depth to this subject of everything happening now, and I think, I'm not even scratching the surface, even though I'm taking a shot at it all the time. Um, but I think this is one extra way, or one extra step in trying to solve this kind of mystery of what is this, how is this working? This everything is happening now, with an infinite number of streams of consciousnesses that experience things simultaneously. Um, there's always a new way to navigate through this, always a more interesting way. Um, and you can start from the same point, but not with the same emotion. Um, and that would take you somewhere else, for instance, and do other things. And the number of combinations here is just infinite. Even within a single one of these scenes, like here or here, like I was saying, the number of emotions that you can feel within any given scene is infinite as well. The nuances, the level of nuances, which is why everything is happening now, and at the same time, there's just always a new way to experiment the same prop, the same scene, the same support, the same decor, and play better and better. And it's the same. Like I gave the example of an orchestra. They play the same piece over and over again, but it sounds completely different from the first rehearsal, um, to the moment where they play it live, at the concert. And even every concert, it's unique. Like every musician still evolves and perfects his art and his way of playing the song or the symphony. And so even if the universe sort of repeats the exact same um, sequences of props, just like in this movie, which is one of my favorites now, it's really funny, Groundhog Day. Even if you repeat the exact same things over and over again, what changes is your emotional state. And so I guess that's also one way to sort of improve upon something that has been already experienced maybe an infinite number of times, or nearly so. Like maybe the universe has already experienced this very moment that we're experiencing now with me talking um, in this video and you watching this, but your emotional state and my emotional state um, have been different. Maybe I was in a more panicky way, or maybe I was more passionate, or maybe I was more joyful, maybe I was more sad, or maybe I was more desperate. And that changes actually everything because, like I was saying, emotions is the way you navigate through these scenes. And if for instance, I was um, in a sad mood or emotion, or a desperate emotional mood, like, or a completely delirious one, saying, "Oh my God, like God knows everything," or and getting mixed up, or my mind going completely crazy because these concepts are mind bending, then I wouldn't be able to I would navigate through these scenes in a completely different way because I would spiral down towards more negative and lower vibrationary state, vibration state emotions, um, and I wouldn't be able to navigate in the same way or play the same things. So it's almost as if like an orchestra um, lowers its pitch or something, or if the musicians start um, fiddling with their instruments and they start being out of tune, and the whole symphony kind of you know um, um, becomes less and less in tune and more painful to listen to. And of course, the more that happens, the harder it is to play. I mean, I've had experience playing in an orchestra, and I can tell you that in an amateur one, on top of that. And so when a few musicians start playing out of tune, it brings the whole orchestra down because everybody kind of loses their focus. Everybody's wondering, okay, should we stop playing? Should we continue to play? It just drains you of your energy, and it takes a real masterful conductor to sort of push through some mistakes or some problems and say, okay, no, we're going through this. We're keep on playing. Um, so yeah, it's that kind of thing. Like we may have experienced all of this um, in what would seem is exactly the same, but because our emotional state is different, it is different. Um, and so that's also something that we should understand, is that sometimes when we think about everything happening at the same time, we think of the props happening at the same time. That means we're focused on the scenes. Like, for instance, 1,000 years into the future, and we're thinking, but if that's happening now, then why should we bother going through all the experiences of life and everything, reproducing and stuff, in order to experience that same thing which is happening in 1,000 years within this stream of consciousness. And that's because from your stream of consciousness, maybe you'll experience the same thing with completely different emotions, with a completely different emotional state. And that is the whole purpose. Just like an orchestra might play the same musical piece, but they will improve upon it and play it better, or play it in a more happy way, or a faster way, or whatever. It's the same musical piece, but it's just still different. And that's something that is actually quite magical in classical music, is that you have pieces that have been there, musical pieces that have been there for hundreds of years, that have been played by just about every orchestra that you can think of. And sometimes you go to a concert and you're still surprised by what you hear. You're still surprised in the interpretation, the minute little details about how each note is played, the length of the note, the intensity, the volume, the speed, everything. Everything about it is unique, and you're just like, wow. And that's exactly the same for um, infinity, the absolute. Um, sure, like the number of possibilities, the number of props that you can be surrounded with is infinite. But what's most interesting is the emotional state that you carry through all of these props, all of those scenes, all of that support that you think is outside. Um, and it's by no means easy, because and me, the first one, I'm the first one to look at the props surrounding me, like for instance the house I'm in, the things I'm surrounded with, and I'm thinking, well, if I'm feeling this shitty, it's because of the props. It's because if I were surrounded by other props, I would be feeling better. It's so hard to actually become a sort of a master of your emotions, and a good musician, a good human musician of your emotions, and playing them in a beautiful way, and realizing that every moment of the now is just an opportunity to feel different emotions, to play with the props in a more harmonious way, in a better way, as a human, regardless of what surrounds you. It's just so hard. So let's be easy on ourselves. Let's also be easy on our minds, because this is hard, mind bending enough. And of course, don't need me to tell you that there might be um, an infinite stream of consciousness that starts exploring from this point on and goes like this, and one that starts from this point and goes like this, um, or like this actually. And so, yes, the future already exists, but it's not necessarily your stream of consciousness that exploring that future, and that future is explored by a different stream of consciousness which has different emotions, which has also a different past, because maybe the stream of consciousness that is exploring gardening in the future from your perspective, if you're here, is doing it with certain emotions that you would never be able to relate to. And so what's the point? You don't even need to reach out to that person. And so once you reach a point where you're starting to explore multi-dimensionality, everything happening at the same time, and all that stuff, it can really blow your mind a bit into bits. And you're trying to see how you can relate to the future, to the past, to all of that, and it actually throws you right back into where you are in your moment of the now, in your stream of consciousness, and where you are heading, and where you have been, and where you want to go. Because it doesn't matter if you visit the same prop. What matters is how you visit that same prop. If the you that is gardening in the future of that same day is already experiencing gardening, that version of you is not necessarily experiencing that activity with the same emotions that you're going to experience them, and hence the music you're playing is completely different. Just like a musician that plays the same melody at 11 a.m. in the morning, and then at 3 p.m. in the afternoon plays it just slightly differently. And that slight little difference is all the difference, actually, because that's the only real nuance and interesting thing, from the point of view of the absolute. Because the props don't change, but the way you feel about the props do change. So I hope you found this interesting. I'm having a headache, because I'm still kind of stumbling upon all these things. as you may have noticed. So sorry about that. But I hope you found this interesting nevertheless, and talk to you in the next episode. And if you have any comments, of course, feel free to drop a line. Thank you very much.